SYS presents Adventures in Online Education.
Hello, friends. You're listening to SYS Presents Adventures in Online Education. I'm your host, Natalie Conway. Thanks for being here. On today's episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with McTighe. If you haven't heard of McTighe before today, I encourage you to check him out. His work with Grant Wiggins on understanding by design is exceptional. Jay has a wealth of experience and knowledge developed during a rich and varied career in education. He is an accomplished author, having co-authored 17 books, including the award-winning and best-selling Understanding by Design series with the late Grant Wiggins. His books have been translated into 12 languages. Jay has also written more than 50 articles and book chapters and been published in leading journals including Educational Leadership and Education Week. He has an extensive background in professional development and is a regular speaker at national, state, and district conferences and workshops. He has conducted workshops in 47 states within the U.S., in 7 Canadian provinces, and internationally to educators in 35 countries on 6 continents. Today, Jay and I talk about understanding by design, or backward planning, and so much more, from beliefs about education and how they drive our work with students, to assessment and critical thinking skills. You're going to love this conversation. So, you ready? Let's learn something new. McTighe, I am so honored to speak with you today. Thank you very much for coming on this podcast.
My pleasure.
I am very excited. I first learned about your work and the work of Grant Wiggins when I was first being introduced to backward design and understanding by design. And so I feel like I have read so many things and watched so many videos. And so to get to speak with you today is really an honor. And I'm excited for our audience to get to hear your ideas and hear you speak about understanding by design because it fits so nicely into an online school setting. It's something that teachers in brick and mortar for sure can harness as a framework, but it's really something that lends itself to the thought out nature that is an online class. So let's dive right in. My first question for you, Ryan Bowens wrote an article for Vanderbilt in 2017. It was about your and the late Grant Wiggins' work on understanding by design. And for those new to the idea, understanding by design is a framework. It's not necessarily a philosophy or an approach. It is all about making instructional choices by design. And in Bowen's article, he writes, quote, "When teachers are designing lessons, units, or courses, they often focus on the activities and the instruction rather than the outputs of the instruction. Therefore, it can be stated that teachers often focus more on teaching rather than learning. This perspective can lead to the misconception that learning is the activity when, in fact, learning is derived from a careful consideration of the meaning of the activity," end quote. I know that's a bit wordy and lengthy, but how does the understanding by design framework help a teacher to focus on the meaning of the tasks they want to present to students? And maybe can you define understanding by design for us in your own words as well?
Sure. Well, you did a good job characterizing understanding by design as a framework. It's not a program. It's not a philosophy per se, although embedded within the ideas of understanding by design is a belief that a modern education should ultimately prepare students to be able to transfer their learning, to be able to take what they've learned and apply that learning to new and even unpredictable situations. And I think it's fair to say that the modern world presents itself as a place where knowledge is continuing to grow, where new opportunities and challenges emerge, and in fact is unpredictable. And the pandemic that we're unfortunately still suffering through, and as is the world, was on very few radar screens 30 months ago. It's a sobering reminder that we're preparing students for not a predictable world. Accordingly, my belief is, and understanding by design kind of underscores this, that a modern education should do more than equip students to give back information that they've learned in a kind of a rote way. Rather, we should be preparing them to be able to flexibly apply their learning to new things. But think about it, you can't transfer something that you don't understand. If all you have is rote learning, all you can do is give back what was told to you in the way it was told. And so an underpinning idea in understanding by design is we should be preparing students ultimately to transfer their learning. And to transfer, you need to understand things more than just knowing them, as in the ability to remember. And so that is a big part of understanding by design. Now, more pointedly to the question, I think Ryan Bowen has it right by observing that teaching does not ensure learning. And sometimes you hear teachers say, well, I covered that. But the real
Yes.
question is, what do kids learn from our coverage? A teacher might say, well, yeah, I taught that. But the question is, do the students understand it? And can they use that, what you've taught, and how will you know? So fundamentally, as a framework, understanding by design uses a, quote, backward design process. That's the design part of UBD that involves 3 stages. And while backward design is certainly not new, Grant Wiggins and I didn't invent it, we have found that it's an effective planning process. And to your point, it's an effective process for anything you want students to learn, be it in a brick and mortar or a blended or a totally online learning environment. So very briefly, the 3 stages of backward design start with identifying in stage 1 our desired results. Now, anyone hearing this might say, well, duh. Of course, anyone teaching anything should have goals or objectives in mind. Agreed. But one of the big ideas in understanding by design is that we need to be clear about our priorities for learning. And I think most teachers teaching today, regardless of grade, age, context, would agree that there's potentially too much content and not enough time. And if you're in a public school district in the US at least, or a province in Canada, you're obligated to state or provincial standards. And in most subject areas, there's an ambitious array of content in those standards. So what do we do about that? Well, one thing we could do is talk faster in class and we could cover more. But that's not likely to develop and deepen student understanding and result in learning that lasts. So a long-standing priority in understanding by design is, in fact, to have teachers and curriculum teams be able to prioritize the curriculum, to focus what they teach, not trying to cover everything at a superficial level, but to zero in on the, quote, bigger ideas, the transferable concepts and processes that are really most worth understanding, and prioritize and focus on those. And so in our planning process, of our design process in stage 1, we ask teachers to identify what we call transfer goals. In other words, let's be clear about what we want students to be able to do with their learning, how we want them to be able to apply it. We then ask the question, well, what will they need to understand in order to transfer? And we actually encourage people to specify desired understandings. We use what we've referred to as essential questions as a means of framing the content we teach, particularly pointing toward transfer and understanding. And finally, of course, we identify the more specific and discrete knowledge and skill objectives, the things that students should know and do. Clearly, to say we want to focus on understanding and transfer in no way is meant to suggest that we don't care about, foundational knowledge or basic skills. Certainly those are foundational. You can't do anything if you don't have basic
Right,
knowledge or
you need
skills.
that.
But that's not to say that all knowledge is equal, that all standards are equally important, and that there's not a need to prioritize. So in a nutshell, stage 1 of UBD asks us to be clear about our priorities and to think about the various elements that I described. Stage 2 of backward design asks a fundamentally different but important question. Essentially, how will we know that students have achieved the desired results that we've targeted? And that asks us to think like assessors. Thinking like an assessor means to ask the question, how will I know that students have the knowledge I've identified, are developing proficiency in the skills, but also do they understand the larger ideas and can they apply that learning? And then we get to stage 3, which is the learning plan. Now, stage 3 is where day-to-day teacher planning occurs. This is where we plan activities, decide on the resources we'll use, think about how much time we'll take for various learning experiences. But the logic of backward design is crystal clear, and it goes back to your question. We should be focusing our teaching and learning activities in stage 3 based on the clarity and priority of our curriculum goals in stage 1, with knowledge and mindfulness, if you will, of the assessment evidence needed in stage 2. When teachers understand backward design and plan accordingly, they're much better able to answer Ryan Bowens' question, are we focusing on learning, not just on learning activities?
I think that is such a really important distinction to make. And knowing your end result, knowing the end goal, and having that be, I feel, a lofty goal, right? You're not just necessarily saying, I want students to be able to add 2-digit and 2-digit numbers. You're saying, I want them to understand that when they add 2-digit numbers, this is what happens, or these are the things that might occur. And now can they apply that and solve a word problem with it, or whatever it might be, that if you have that because you've thought of that first, you have that end result in mind, then every activity or every tangent you might go off of, right? Especially if you're an elementary teacher or any level really, if that tangent is meaningful to your end result or to deepening understanding or not, because you have that end result. At least for me, that end result is always in the back of my head. So even if I am 8 weeks from that final project or final learning activity, whatever it might be, it's always sitting there. And so I think that also is what empowers each of those little daily choices that we make for what video am I going to show them or what activity are we going to do in live class, all of that.
Yep, no, exactly right. So here are a couple of further thoughts. In my experience, there are certain areas of the curriculum and people who teach those areas that think this way naturally. And those areas include teachers in the visual performing arts, career technology education, often but not always, physical education and health, and even teachers of writing at all grade levels. And think about, what do those areas have in common? Visual performing arts or physical education or career technology, they're all what I would call performance-based areas. So whether it's auto mechanics where you're working to rebuild an engine, or writing, you're preparing a persuasive essay, or visual art, you're producing a piece of ceramics. There's an end product or performance that defines your goals, and you plan backward from those. And so the learning activities, often in those performance-based subject areas, are very purposeful. The kids know why they're doing what they're doing because they know what the end is. And so that mindset really is a natural way of thinking, kind of backward, using backward design. You see it also in extracurriculars, right? Athletics, drama, yearbook, theater. And by the way, my experience is often students find sometimes the most meaningful part of their school experiences are in those extracurriculars. And I think in part it's because they're working toward authentic products and performances. The end is known, they can see their growth, there's an audience often,
Mm-hmm.
and those are the things that make learning meaningful. And so I think we can emulate those qualities or those elements in all subject areas, and we should. Here's one further analogy, and it actually links to athletics. I like to say to teachers, think of your goals as like the game in athletics. And if you think like a coach, you always have the game in mind, and the game requires authentic performance. Every game is different, and so the players have to transfer everything they've learned in practice onto the field or onto the court or onto the ice. But then plan backward like coaches do. You take the players you have, you find out where they are with respect to their knowledge of the game, their skill levels, and also their understandings of the game, known as game strategy. And then you plan practices accordingly to build the knowledge, skills, and understandings needed for the game. It really is the right model to me for the most effective teaching. And to throw in a little dig, I've never heard a coach say to me, "Oh, Jay, I don't have time for those games. They take all afternoon. How could I ever cover my playbook?"
Right.
But you hear teachers, understandably, because there's pressures, of course, but saying, "Oh, I don't have time for that performance task or that project. I've just got to cover all the curriculum or make it through my textbook before the end of the year." And with all due respect to the pressures of teaching, I don't believe our job is to cover a book or to march through a long list of grade level standards one by one. I think we need to be clear about the game we want students to play, how we want them to use their learning, find out where they are, and build their capacity to play the game well.
Absolutely. Really well said. And I love the analogy with sports and those more performative or demonstrative aspects of education, because that's what matters. Especially you'll hear, lots of graduation speeches or kids in high school say like, why did we have to learn this or this thing? And it's because they don't understand a meaning for it. They don't have maybe a deep understanding of that concept or that skill or why they were learning it. And it's our job to really make all of that meaningful. And if that is challenging for us, then we need to do some deep work ourselves as to what standards we are prioritizing and what we're doing in the classroom. That's all fantastic. We'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk more about understanding by design, of course, but also differentiation and how those things can go together. Stick with us. What's the one thing all online schools and programs struggle with? Student engagement and the ability to truly personalize interventions. How do we solve those problems? With the use of Admin Dash, a brand new Canvas LTI tool from SYS Education. Admin Dash allows online teachers to see a risk assessment score that proactively identifies students who may need more specialized attention or intervention, and offers a communication log that provides an outlet for complete transparency among teachers, admin, students, and families. At just 99 cents per student per year, and with no minimum price and no fees, you can't afford to not use Admin Dash. For more information about Admin Dash, contact sales@syseducation.org and start connecting proactively with your online learners. Welcome back, online educators. I am talking with the fabulous Jay McTighe today about understanding by design. Now, Jay, you wrote a book with Carol Ann Tomlinson entitled Integrating Differentiated Instruction and Understanding by Design, Connecting Content and Kids. If we're planning units of study using backward design, how do we leave room for differentiation, for student choice, for flexibility in how learning is demonstrated? If we are so fixed on our final goal, is there still wiggle room in the day-to-day operations of our classes?
That's a great question, and my answer is decidedly yes. And let me play this out using the 3 stages of backward design. Stage 1 of backward design calls for clarity about our learning outcomes. But one interesting part of stage 1 is, as I mentioned briefly, that we encourage teachers not only to be clear about what they want students to understand and what they want them to be able to do with their learning, but to think about framing those things through what I've called essential questions. Essential questions are inherently open-ended questions. They're not looking for a single correct answer. On the contrary, they're meant to spark thinking, discussion, even debate. They're meant to engage students in, quote, making meaning. Because they're inherently open-ended, essential questions are inviting. They invite all kids in. We're not going to have a certain question for one group and a lower level question for another. In fact, my colleague and friend Carol Tomlinson says, by posing intellectually open, honest, interesting questions to kids, we are showing them intellectual respect. We're saying, we think you can think, we value your thoughts, we want you to engage with these open, interesting questions. So let me give just a few examples for people that might not be familiar with the term. So essential questions are open-ended, and we have them in every subject. Here are some examples in no particular order. How do writers hook and hold their readers? What do effective problem solvers do when they get stuck? What should we eat? When, if ever, should we fight? What makes art worth viewing? These are just examples, and I hope they give you the spirit that these are open questions, they're interesting questions. They're meant to uncover the content, not to just cover lots of facts. And so the reality, of course, is some kids are going to go deeper with the questions than others. But one way of honoring the differences that students bring to schools and to online learning is by showing them intellectual respect. Now, your question is a bit more pointed, I would say, towards stage 2, because you asked, is there room for student choice and flexibility in how learning is demonstrated? Well, that's a stage 2 question. And so when we think about assessment evidence, the assessments we use should be directly linked to the goals we've identified in stage 1. So if there are things that we want students to know, and there will be, we use objective tests and quizzes and questions to see if they know those things. And we probably aren't going to differentiate that much. If kids should know their multiplication tables, that's what we want them to know. The same thing with skills. If we want them to be able to write an effective paragraph, that's what we're going to work toward. And we're going to assess to see how well they do. So without apology, there may not be much differentiation when we're assessing knowledge and skills. But let us jump up to understanding. This becomes interesting because if we're clear about something we want students to understand, there in fact can be different ways in which students demonstrate their understanding. Accordingly, we can give appropriate voice and choice options within performance tasks and still get the evidence that we need. Let me give you two examples, one related to declarative knowledge and one related to procedural knowledge. So for declarative knowledge, and I'm talking about facts, concepts, principles, here's an example that we use in our book. It's from a unit on nutrition for 5th, 6th grade level, roughly. And one of the concepts that we want students to understand is the concept of a balanced diet. We also want them to understand the benefits of healthful eating and some of the potential health problems that could result from poor eating. So those are some of the understandings in a unit on nutrition. Well, a performance task that we describe for that unit is the students have to communicate to an audience what a balanced diet is, why it's important, and what might result by not following proper nutrition. So that's the basic assessment. We want to see if they can do that. But we could give students options. And in fact, in our book, we talked about 3 versions of a performance task on nutrition. Version 1, your goal is to write a picture book that you could use to teach a 1st grader about the concept of balanced diet, show examples of balanced diets, and illustrate at least 2 health problems that might result from poor eating. Version 2, you want to communicate these things to kids your age. So develop a product that will show them or teach them these things. And it could be through a short article, a podcast. You could record yourself teaching a lesson, presenting examples, and so on. Version 3 of the task, you are a nutrition expert preparing information for adults and teenagers about the importance of healthy, balanced eating and the potential health problems from poor nutrition. And so your product might be in the form of an article, a position paper, an infographic that could be placed at supermarket checkout stands, and so forth. So those to me are examples where there's appropriate voice and choice given. But here's the important part. We're getting evidence of our goal or goals, which is understanding healthy, balanced eating and potential problems that could result from not eating a healthy diet. Now, when teachers hear those examples, they might say, yeah, but the kids are producing 3 different products. A picture book is different than a news article or a podcast. And so that's not really equal, is it? And my answer is it's a backward design matter. If the goal is evidence of understanding balanced diet and nutrition, then we can see that understanding in different forms. But here's the other part of it. When we assess what students do, even if we were to give them those 3 options, or if they were to choose even, we would be using the same criteria for judging what they did, right? And so if you think about it, I like to call it the bookends. The goals are the same, stage 1, and the success criteria are the same, but between the bookends, we can have often appropriate voice and choice. In other words, we can differentiate the assessments as long as we're getting evidence of the goals and judging them consistently. Now, people might also say, yeah, but wouldn't you need a different rubric for a picture book than an expert article? And my answer is, well, if you're looking at the product only, yes. But remember, this is a nutrition unit. It's not an art unit or a writing unit. So that's my answer. Example number 1. Let me do a quicker example number 2. One of the procedures, I'll call it procedures, or one of the processes that is found in all 4 academic standards of mathematics, science, English language arts, and social studies is argumentation. And the standards call for students who are able to develop and support an argument and also critique the reasoning of others in argument. That's a high yield. I'll call it a transfer goal. It's something we want kids to get good at. And so if we want to assess students' ability in argumentation, we can give them choice. We could give them three issues, let's say, that are in their school or in their community or even national issues, and ask them to research different positions on those issues, decide on their own position, develop their argument for their position. Or we could even say to them, you pick an issue that's of interest and relevance to you, do your research, come up with your position, and develop your argument. So that's a good example where voice and choice can be very natural, but keep in mind the goals are the same, argumentation, and the success criteria will be the same, regardless of what issue or what position a student took. And for argumentation, I like to say there are four main criteria. Have you clearly stated your claim? Have you supported your claim with solid evidence and logical reasoning? And fourth, have you effectively countered objections to your position? So regardless of what issue they pick or even what form they choose to communicate it, the goals are the same and the criteria for judging what they do is the same. To summarize, we can have appropriate differentiation, voice and choice while still getting the evidence we need.
I really appreciate that you highlighted as well the intellectual respect for students, that we're holding all students to the same standard and how they get there can be different, and that's okay. I think oftentimes we have a sort of ableist attitude towards some academic endeavors, and we feel that there's more value in a white paper than there is in a children's book, when really that's not necessarily true. If a student is demonstrating their knowledge and we're giving them a challenging, open-ended question to answer, no matter how they do that, if they meet the criteria like you so clearly outlined, then they've met the target and they've demonstrated that they understand and that they're transferring this to answer a complex, open-ended question. I also really appreciate that you highlighted that essential questions are on purpose open-ended. It reminds us that when we focus on critical thinking and when we focus on applying skills, we're not teaching kids what to think. We are teaching students how to think critically, and then they decide from there what it is they believe or what stance they're going to take. But there is no agenda on the part of the educator or the standard. It is up to their interpretation, but they're supposed to engage deeply with it. So those are just a couple of nuggets I really appreciate you bringing forward to us. If a teacher wants to start designing their own online courses to be more effective by using the backward design framework or the UBD framework, where should they begin? Is there a blueprint? Are there resources? Should they just go buy your books? Where should we head?
The good news is Understanding by Design has been out there for now 25 years. And there are lots of resources, both books, articles, podcasts, videos, and many examples online. But I'll give you three more specific answers to your question of the question of where should people start. We have a, quote, design template that we've used in Understanding by Design. It's a unit planner, not a lesson planner. Lessons are part of stage 3. But the template basically is a graphic organizer that embodies or reflects the 3 stages of backward design, and it has the elements of UBD some of which I've mentioned. Now, occasionally I'll meet teachers that when they see a template, they'll kind of pull back and say, I don't like to put my ideas in boxes. And my response when I hear that is, don't put your ideas in boxes then. The fact that we have a template, it's not about filling in the boxes. It's a way of thinking, it's a way of embodying priorities, having evidence for what you claim to be teaching, and making sure that your teaching learning activities are all focused in the right direction with the end in mind. Having said that, I'm a fan of the template for 2 reasons. One, like any good graphic organizer, it models a way of thinking, and thus, as I've heard many teachers say to me over the years, when I use that template a couple of times, it's in my head. It's a mental template. It's a way of thinking, and that's the right spirit. The second reason, however, is that I think there's value in having consistency of format. And because understanding by design is literally being used by thousands and thousands of teachers all over the world, having a common format makes it easier for sharing and for finding things. And so the consistency of the template is of value, I'd say. So use a template is my short suggestion. Now, there are a number of books on understanding by design, but the two that I would recommend for anyone that wants to get into this at a very practical level, the first of these is called the Understanding by Design Guide to Creating High Quality Units. It's from ASCD, it's Wiggins and McTighe. And then there's a second, kind of the next level, which is called the Advanced Guide to UBD. When Grant and I put these together, we wanted a publication that would help people learn UBD in a very practical level when they might not have access to a course or a workshop. And so it literally is a guide. It's very practical, lots of examples, design tools, and so on. We wanted it to be a single book, but it was getting so big, the publisher made us split it into those two. But you could just go to ASCD and look up Wiggins and McTighe and Design Guide, and you'll find those.
Awesome. And we'll link them in our show notes too.
Okay, good. I also have, for anyone that's interested in more kind of maybe traditional learning, I have developed a set of online modules available through a company called EduPlanet 21. I'll send you a link to those, and you could put those in the show notes, because that's essentially if I'm asked to do a UBD 101 workshop, it's what I do. The nice thing about that is it is online. They're in modules, so they're kind of chunked, and people could watch them 24/7 by themselves, or they could watch them with a cohort group. There could be a facilitator, and they're oriented toward helping you design a unit. So the idea is that it's a learn by doing process. Then finally, I'll give some general advice for teachers that may be new to UBD, and it's a 3-part aphorism. So here goes. Think big, start small, and go for an early win. So think big. If you see value in understanding by design as a process, think about 2, 3, 4 years from now, everything you teach will be planned and taught in this format. So think big, but start small. I'll be the first to admit that understanding by design is not a simple planning process. It can be harder than it looks. It takes time to get comfortable with it. And so don't try to do it for everything you're teaching right away. Start small. For me, if you're teaching a traditional course or grade level, let's say, think about, if it's a course, a secondary course, think about just doing one UBD unit first semester and one second semester. Don't try to do everything. And then the final part of the aphorism is go for an early win. Well, what does that mean? For me, that means pick a topic that you know well, pick your favorite unit, pick a unit where you've got a lot of this stuff already. I've got a great performance task, all right? I have some good open questions that I use already. Don't pick your hardest unit or a brand new unit you've never taught. Don't start there. Go for an early win. Finally, go for an early win means find good examples online. Don't reinvent wheels. If you find a great essential question, a great performance task, use it or adapt it. You don't have to create everything from scratch. So that's my mantra. Think big, start small, go for early wins, and you will see over time that I believe your curriculum, your teaching, your assessment will become more effective, more engaging for students, and you'll have this system.
Absolutely. Sometimes when we're excited about a new way of teaching or a new way of thinking about our teaching, we want to apply it to everything and we want to do it 110%. So I really appreciate you encouraging us to think big for sure and get excited and envision what the whole year could look like, maybe next year or in the future, but that we can start small. And thank you for giving us permission to take a bite-sized bite and start from there, because I think it's a really important thing to remember. I was mentoring a teacher this year, and she was new to understanding by design and backward planning. And so I just guided her through it for one little part of a module, not even a whole thing to start with, just here, let's just look at next week. And what's the thing you want them to do by the end of next week? And then we grew from there. So we started really small, and it was great because by the end of the school year, she was backwards designing multiple units for multiple subject areas as an elementary teacher. So I think that starting small really snowballs quickly. And I also appreciate you letting us know that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Not everything you create has to be something that you created from scratch at 6 p.m. at night while you were trying to relax and turn your brain off from work. That it's okay to find someone else's awesome resource and take it and run with it with your students.
There's actually one other thing I wanted to include under the work smart or go for an early win, and that is, as much as possible, I really encourage teachers to find a partner or a team to plan with. It's tough doing this by yourself Sunday evening.
Mm-hmm.
And if at all possible, work with a colleague or a team. I think and maybe because I'm a curriculum nerd, but I think it's actually energizing and professionally enriching to kick around ideas with colleagues, to say, what is the most important idea in this content? How will we know kids understand? What's an authentic, relevant performance test that will be both engaging, develop their learning, but also give us evidence? So that's another recommendation.
Absolutely. And that's where my brain always naturally goes because I'm a special education teacher by trade and I've done a lot of inclusion work. And so I'm constantly co-planning, co-teaching, all of that. And so I completely agree. I think we're better when we work on it together and we bounce ideas around. Someone's going to see the essential question through a different lens than you are, or they're going to come up with a better essential question than you came up with. And that is all good. We absolutely get better when we collaborate and work together. And that's what we're always encouraging our students to do. And so if we do that as well, I think the outcomes are greater for sure. I have one final question for you if you're game.
I am game, yes.
All right. All the guests on this season, I am asking if there is one thing, material or otherwise, that you could give to every teacher in the United States, what would it be and why?
Well, this to me is a blue sky question, so I'll give you a blue sky answer, but not trivial. Peace of mind. We have been through such a stressful period with the pandemic. Teaching itself is one of the most demanding professions. And the best teachers work themselves to the bone and sometimes are not satisfied because it's never ending. So, if I could do the magic wand, it would be peace of mind, tranquility, as well as energy for themselves because of so much they give in their profession.
They absolutely do. Teachers are some of the biggest givers on the planet and self-sacrificers. And so peace of mind is a beautiful gift to give. I love that. And I hope all the teachers listening today get to feel energized and get to feel some tranquility after listening to you speak and teaching us about understanding by design. Jay, if folks want to get in touch with you or if they want to learn more about understanding by design, where can they find you?
Probably the easiest place is my website, which is literally just my name, jmctighe.com. And I have many resources, articles, podcasts, videos, compilations of essential questions, performance task resources, etc., posted there, along with books and long list of articles. So it's kind of a one-stop shop for all things UBD.
Awesome. It is a treasure trove. And we'll put the link in the show notes as well. But listeners, make sure you head over to jmctighe.com because it's so much good information for you. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your encouragement with us. Really appreciate your time and really thankful for this conversation.
Okay, well, I enjoyed it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to this episode of SYS Presents Adventures in Online Education. Special thanks to my guest today, Jay McTighe. Jay taught us so much today, but maybe the most important thing we learned was to think big and start small. Going for those early wins can positively change the way we work with our curriculum and our students. If you liked what you heard today, please hit subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. Want to connect? On Twitter, you can follow the show at SYS Presents. We love hearing from you. If you're interested in finding out more about SYS Education and our products and services, head on over to syseducation.org. Lastly, this podcast wouldn't be possible without our exceptional team at SYS Education, including my dream team consisting of sound engineer Natalie Farrell, graphic designer and social media and website manager Lexi Boren, and our producer, Bo Neal. Thanks for listening today. And remember, we can learn new things.
Thanks for listening.